A proposal that shocked allies. When former U.S. President Donald Trump once floated the idea of acquiring Greenland, the reaction from the international community ranged from disbelief to outright dismissal. Initially treated as an off-the-cuff remark or political theater, the proposal resurfaced repeatedly, evolving into what Trump later described as an infinite deal, a long-term strategic arrangement that he claimed would secure American interests in the Arctic forever. Yet, as details were scrutinized and governments responded, the idea ran headlong into diplomatic reality. Greenland's political status, Denmark's sovereignty, NATO's unity, and the will of Greenland's own people all emerged as immovable obstacles. What began as a bold assertion of geopolitical ambition ultimately revealed the limits of unilateral power in a complex, rules-based international order. This is the story of how Trump's Greenland plan unfolded and why it collapsed under the weight of political, legal, and strategic realities. Greenland, strategic island, sovereign territory. Greenland, the world's largest island, occupies a unique place in global geopolitics. Though geographically part of North America, it is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Home to just under 60,000 people, Greenland governs most of its domestic affairs, while Denmark retains control over defense and foreign policy. The island's importance has grown significantly in recent decades due to climate change and great power competition. Melting Arctic ice has opened new shipping routes, increased access to rare earth minerals, and heightened military interest in the region. The United States has long maintained a presence in Greenland through Thule Air Base, now Pituffik Space Base, a critical component of U.S. missile defense and space surveillance. Against this backdrop, Trump's interest in Greenland was not entirely without precedent. The U.S. government considered purchasing Greenland in 1867 and again after World War II. Both times, Denmark declined. However, modern international norms, combined with Greenland's expanded autonomy, make such transactions vastly more complicated today. Trump's first public suggestion. Trump's Greenland proposal first entered public discourse during his presidency, when reports emerged that he had asked advisors to explore the possibility of buying the island. The revelation drew swift responses from Danish officials, who called the idea absurd and emphasized that Greenland was not for sale. Trump reacted sharply to the criticism, canceling a planned state visit to Denmark and framing the response as disrespectful. The episode briefly faded from headlines, but it planted the seed for a recurring theme in Trump's foreign policy rhetoric, the assertion that U.S. economic and military power entitled it to reshape global arrangements, the return of the idea, from purchase to deal. Years later, as Trump remained a central figure in American politics, the Greenland idea resurfaced, this time reframed. Rather than a direct purchase, Trump began describing a long-term strategic deal involving security, economic cooperation, and Arctic development. Speaking at international forums and campaign events, Trump referred to the arrangement as an infinite deal, suggesting it would lock in American influence indefinitely. He argued that such a deal was necessary to counter growing Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic. Crucially, however, Trump offered few concrete details. The lack of clarity raised questions among diplomats and analysts about whether the proposal involved expanded U.S. basing rights, economic leverage, political control, or something else entirely. Tariffs and pressure on allies. As scrutiny in Trump escalated his rhetoric, he suggested that European allies, including Denmark, could face economic consequences if they resisted U.S. strategic demands related to Greenland. The implication of tariffs against NATO partners alarmed diplomats and raised concerns about alliance cohesion. European leaders pushed back firmly. Officials in Denmark reiterated that Greenland's future could only be decided by its people. NATO representatives emphasized that alliance unity could not be coerced through economic threats. The episode underscored a familiar pattern from Trump's political career: the use of economic leverage as a negotiating tool, even with close allies. Davos and the framework announcement. The turning point came at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Trump announced that a framework for future Arctic cooperation had been reached. He characterized this as a breakthrough that justified backing away from tariff threats and described the framework as effectively infinite in duration. However, almost immediately, discrepancies emerged between Trump's characterization and the accounts of other parties involved. NATO officials clarified that discussions had focused broadly on Arctic security and cooperation, not on Greenland's sovereignty or any transfer of control. The gap between Trump's rhetoric and the substance of the talks became impossible to ignore. Denmark and Greenland respond. Danish leaders moved quickly to clarify their position. Greenland, they emphasized, is not a bargaining chip in international negotiations. Any changes to its status would require the consent of its population, which has repeatedly expressed opposition to foreign control. Greenlandic officials echoed this stance. While welcoming cooperation and investment, they rejected any notion of ceding sovereignty. Public opinion in Greenland strongly favors greater independence, not incorporation into another state. For many in Greenland, Trump's comments reinforced long-standing concerns about being treated as a strategic asset rather than a self-governing society. NATO pushback and alliance concerns. Within NATO, Trump's framing of the Greenland issue raised alarms. Alliance officials stressed that security cooperation must be based on consensus, not unilateral demands. The suggestion that tariffs or economic pressure could be used against allies threatened to undermine trust at a time of heightened global instability. NATO's Secretary General made clear that Greenland's political status had not been discussed in negotiations with Trump, contradicting claims of a sweeping deal. The clarification further weakened the credibility of the infinite deal narrative. Legal and political reality experts in international law were blunt. Acquiring Greenland, whether through purchase or long-term control, would face enormous legal barriers. Denmark's constitution, Greenland's self-rule framework, and international law all protect the right of peoples to self-determination. Even an expansive security agreement would require approval from multiple governments and potentially referendums. The notion of an indefinite arrangement granting the U.S. exceptional rights was widely viewed as unrealistic. Strategic goals without sovereignty. Despite the collapse of Trump's broader vision, analysts note that U.S. strategic interests in Greenland are already largely met. The U.S. military presence continues under existing agreements, and cooperation with Denmark and Greenland on Arctic issues remains strong. In this sense, the controversy may have achieved little beyond diplomatic friction. Some argue that Trump's approach ultimately weakened U.S. influence by alienating partners whose cooperation is essential for Arctic security. Media and public reaction media coverage of the Greenland plan evolved from bemusement to skepticism. Early headlines treated the proposal as an eccentric idea. Later reporting focused on the disconnect between rhetoric and reality. Public reaction in the U.S. was similarly divided. Supporters framed the proposal as bold thinking, while critics viewed it as emblematic of an aggressive and outdated view of global politics. The collapse of the infinite deal. As official statements accumulated and allies clarified their positions, it became clear that Trump's infinite deal existed largely in rhetoric. No binding agreement emerged. No sovereignty changes occurred. The Arctic status quo remained intact. What collapsed was not a formal treaty, but a narrative, one that underestimated the complexity of modern geopolitics and the agency of smaller nations, international repercussions, and diplomatic fallout. While the immediate outcome of Trump's Greenland plan was the absence of any formal agreement, the diplomatic U.S. defense planners have long viewed Greenland as a critical node in early warning systems and missile defense. Analysts agree that American engagement in the Arctic is necessary, but they argue that it must be conducted through alliances and international law. The Greenland episode illustrated the tension between strategic urgency and diplomatic restraint. While Trump emphasized speed and dominance, most Arctic stakeholders favored patience and cooperation. Economic realities behind the rhetoric. Trump often framed Greenland as an untapped economic opportunity, citing mineral wealth and strategic shipping routes. However, experts caution that extracting resources in Greenland is costly, environmentally risky, and politically sensitive. Greenland's economy remains heavily dependent on fishing and Danish subsidies. Large-scale mining projects face opposition from environmental groups and local communities concerned about long-term ecological damage. Any infinite deal promising economic transformation would require massive investment, local consent, and regulatory oversight, none of which can be imposed externally. In this sense, the economic vision behind Trump's rhetoric appeared as uncertain as its political feasibility. Domestic political calculations. In the United States, reactions to the Greenland proposal often reflected broader political divisions. Supporters praised Trump's willingness to challenge diplomatic norms and think strategically about long-term security. Critics accused him of oversimplifying complex issues and alienating allies. Political analysts noted that the Greenland narrative fit neatly into Trump's broader message of American assertiveness and transactional diplomacy. Whether or not the proposal was ever meant to materialize, it succeeded in signaling a particular worldview to his base. Yet even among supporters, questions arose about practicality. Without congressional approval, allied support, or local consent, the plan remained largely symbolic. Media framing and public perception. Over time, media coverage shifted from surprise to skepticism. Initial headlines focused on the novelty of the idea. Later reporting emphasized contradictions between Trump's claims and official statements from Denmark and NATO. Fact-checking became central to the story, particularly as officials clarified that no agreement regarding Greenland's sovereignty had been discussed. The phrase "infinite deal" itself became a point of satire, highlighting the gap between political language and policy reality. For many observers, the episode reinforced the importance of scrutinizing grand geopolitical claims, especially when details are scarce. A case study in modern diplomacy. In retrospect, Trump's Greenland plan serves as a revealing case study in 21st century diplomacy. It demonstrates how global power is constrained not only by law and institutions, but by public opinion, media scrutiny, and the agency of smaller nations. The controversy also underscores how strategic competition must adapt to a world where sovereignty, identity, and environmental concerns cannot be brushed aside. The Arctic's future will likely be shaped not by unilateral deals, but by negotiated frameworks involving many stakeholders. What remains? After the headlines today, cooperation between the U.S., Denmark, and Greenland continues largely unchanged. Military agreements remain in place, scientific research progresses, and diplomatic channels stay open. What has changed is perception. Greenland is more visible internationally. Denmark is more alert to external pressure, and the limits of rhetorical power have been laid bare. The infinite deal never materialized, but the debate it sparked continues to influence conversations about sovereignty, security, and the Arctic's future. Final reflection. Trump's Greenland plan did not fail because of a single diplomatic rejection or legal obstacle. It failed because it collided with a world far more complex than the language used to describe it. In that collision, reality prevailed, not with drama or confrontation, but with quiet persistence. Borders held, institutions responded, voices that were once overlooked demanded to be heard. And Greenland, at the center of a global conversation it did not ask for, emerged with its autonomy intact and its future still its own. Absi.